The night sky above the alien world was torn with smoke and fire. Once a beautiful land filled with glowing forests and crystal rivers, it had now become a graveyard of broken machines and lifeless bodies. The war had ended hours ago, but silence carried more weight than the noise of battle. In that silence, a young alien girl lay in the dust, her body weak, her eyes half closed. Her people had fled, leaving her behind. To them she was nothing but a burden, too wounded to keep pace, too fragile to fight. She thought it was the end. The pain in her chest grew sharper with every breath. Her hands trembled as she tried to pull herself forward, but her strength failed. Her vision blurred, and for a moment, she welcomed the dark. Perhaps it was better this way, to fade into the quiet ground. No more fear, no more struggle, just peace. But destiny had other plans. Through the smoke, heavy boots crunched against the soil. A human soldier walked slowly, his rifle resting across his chest. His armor was scratched, and his face was hardened by battles fought too long. He scanned the wreckage with sharp eyes, looking for survivors, looking for threats. When his gaze fell on the alien girl, he froze. For a moment, he saw only the enemy, the one his people were told to fear and destroy. But then he noticed her state, her frail body, her blood-stained skin, and her quiet, struggling breath. The human stepped closer. The girl tried to move, fear flashing in her dim eyes. She had heard stories of humans, monsters with no mercy. Her lips formed silent words, a plea, a curse, or maybe just her last goodbye. But the soldier did not raise his weapon. Instead, he knelt beside her, his shadow falling over her broken form. "You're still alive," he whispered under his breath, his voice rough but not cruel. He reached for his canteen and tilted it toward her mouth. The alien girl flinched, unsure if this was kindness or a cruel trick. But thirst overcame doubt, and she let a drop of water touch her lips. It burned down her throat like fire, yet gave her enough strength to breathe. The soldier sighed, a deep sound that carried weight. He knew what the rules said: leave no human behind, but leave the enemy to die. Yet as he looked at her, abandoned and fragile, something in him rebelled. Perhaps he saw not an enemy, but a child of war, punished for no crime but existing. Perhaps he remembered his own sister, far away on Earth, waiting for him. Whatever it was, he made his choice. The human lifted the girl carefully into his arms. She gasped in pain, but did not resist. Her head rested weakly against his chest as he rose. Every step he took echoed against the ruins, carrying her away from death. But he knew this choice would cost him. If his command discovered he had saved an alien, they would call him traitor. If the enemy learned of it, they would hunt him without rest. Yet none of that mattered in this moment. All that mattered was the fragile life in his arms. The night grew colder, and shadows stretched across the battlefield. Distant engines rumbled, searching, hunting. The soldier tightened his grip on the girl, his eyes sharp. "We're not safe here," he muttered, though she could barely understand him. Her breathing was shallow, but for the first time, she felt a strange warmth. This human was not like the stories. He had not left her. He had carried her, and somewhere in her fading heart, a spark of hope began to rise. The silence of the battlefield broke with the sound of approaching drones. Their red lights scanned the ruins, sweeping closer. The soldier ducked into the shadows, pressing the girl close against him. The glow of the machines passed just inches away. The air was thick with danger, yet his hands did not tremble. The girl opened her eyes slightly, watching his face in the dim light. It was worn with scars and shadows, yet there was something steady there, something unbreakable. For the first time, she believed she might survive. When the drones moved on, the soldier slipped into the ruins. He carried her toward a distant ridge where smoke rose faintly. Each step felt heavier, yet he did not stop. The girl drifted between light and dark. Her last thought before sleep took her was not of fear, but of the strange human who had chosen to carry her. She had been left to die, but against all reason, she had been saved. And this was only the beginning. The human soldier moved through the ruins with heavy steps, the alien girl still weak in his arms. Her body was cold, her skin pale under the strange light of the alien moon. He could feel her shallow breaths against his armor, each one a reminder that time was running out. She needed shelter, medicine, safety, and none of those things were easy to find on a battlefield. The land around him was broken and cruel. Twisted metal lay half buried in the dirt. Machines smoldered in silence, and smoke hung in the air like a dark veil. Every shadow seemed to hide danger. Every sound could mean death. But the soldier pressed forward, guided by instinct, by training, and by something deeper that he could not explain. The girl stirred faintly, her voice weak like the wind. "Why? Why save me?" she whispered in her language, words he could barely understand. He glanced down, his jaw tightening. "Because no one deserves to be left behind," he muttered, knowing she might not understand. Yet something in his tone reached her heart, and her trembling hand clutched at his armor as if holding on to life itself. Suddenly, a sharp buzzing filled the night. The soldier froze, crouching low behind a half-destroyed vehicle. Above them, red lights swept across the battlefield, drones moving in calculated patterns. They were searching for survivors or for prey. He held his breath as the machines hovered close, their sensors scanning the ruins. The girl pressed her face against his chest, her body trembling with fear. If the drones detected them, there would be no escape. The soldier slowly shifted his grip, his hand moving toward the weapon slung across his back. He could fight, but if he fired, more drones would swarm. No, fighting was not an option, survival was. He stayed still, waiting, letting the shadows shield them. At last, the lights drifted away, and the sound of engines faded into the distance. Only then did he rise again, moving quickly but quietly toward the distant hills. His mind worked fast. He needed a place to rest, to hide, to treat her wounds. An old comm station lay to the north, abandoned after the first wave of fighting. He had seen its silhouette earlier, a broken tower against the horizon. It was risky, but it was the only chance. Hours passed as he moved through broken terrain. The girl drifted in and out of consciousness, her fragile form growing heavier with every step. He whispered to himself to keep moving, to not stop, to not give in to exhaustion. Every soldier knew the weight of survival. But tonight he carried more than just himself. He carried a choice that could change everything. At last, he reached the ruins of the comm station. The tall structure leaned like a dying tree, wires hanging loose, its glass shattered. But inside, the walls still stood, and the roof offered shelter from the cold night sky. He pushed open the heavy door, its hinges screaming softly, and slipped inside. The air smelled of dust and rust. Broken consoles lay scattered across the floor, but there was still space to rest. Gently, he set the girl down on a piece of old fabric torn from a chair. Her breathing was shallow, her pulse faint, but she was alive. He searched through his pack, pulling out a small medkit. With careful hands, he cleaned her wounds, wrapped them in bandages, and gave her a small injection of stimulant to keep her heart steady. The girl flinched at the touch of the needle, but her eyes fluttered open again. She looked at him with a mix of fear and confusion. "You help?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He gave a short nod. "Help, yes," he said simply, pointing her chest, then at his own alive. She stared for a moment, then gave the faintest nod, her eyes closing again. Outside, the night roared with distant explosions. The war was not over, not for either side. The soldier leaned back against the wall, his weapon close, his eyes sharp despite exhaustion. He had made his choice, but choices came with consequences. If command learned of this, he would be branded a traitor. If the enemy learned of it, he would be hunted. But as he watched the fragile figure breathing softly in the dim light, he knew he could not regret it. He whispered softly to himself, "Rest now, little one. Tomorrow we keep moving." The girl shifted slightly, her lips forming words he could not understand. But the tone was clear, it was thanks. For the first time in many years of war, the soldier felt something strange. Not anger, not duty, but hope. And hope was more dangerous than any weapon. The broken comm station was silent, except for the soft breathing of the alien girl. The human soldier sat against the wall, his weapon resting across his knees, his eyes half closed but never asleep. He had learned long ago that closing his guard could mean death, and tonight, with another life depending on him, he could not afford weakness. Morning came slowly on the distant world. The first light of the alien sun cut through the cracks in the station walls, spreading pale blue shadows across the floor. The girl stirred, her weak body shivering as the cold faded into warmth. Her eyes opened slightly, catching sight of the human watching her. Fear flickered in her gaze, but there was also something new. Curiosity. The soldier offered her a piece of ration bar, breaking it gently so she could chew without effort. She hesitated, staring at the strange human food, but hunger pushed her to accept it. The taste was bitter, dry, but it filled her stomach, and for the first time in days, she felt strength return. Eat, the soldier said simply, pointing to the food and then to her. She nodded faintly, understanding the meaning, if not the words. They did not share a language, but survival has a language of its own. A gesture, a nod, a simple act of kindness could speak louder than words. And, slowly, the distance between them began to shrink. Later, as the soldier checked his gear, the girl tried to sit up. Her hands shook, but she refused to stay weak. He moved quickly, helping her lean against the wall, his touch steady but gentle. She looked at him, her lips parting as if to speak. Her words were strange, flowing softly in her alien tongue. He could not understand, but her tone was filled with sorrow, with loneliness. He pointed to himself, tapping his chest. Human, he said firmly. Then he pointed at her, waiting. She blinked, confused, but then whispered, Kalen, her name. He repeated it slowly, awkwardly, but with respect. Kalen. Her eyes widened, surprised that he bothered to try. She pointed back at him, raising her brow in question. He hesitated before answering. Daniel, his voice quiet. Kalen repeated it softly. Daniel, the sound uneven but sincere. And in that broken exchange, a bond began. Hours passed. Daniel searched the station for supplies, finding scraps of fabric, wires, and old batteries. He made a small fire using a broken console, warming the cold air. Kalen watched him closely, studying his every move. Her people had told her humans were cruel, destroyers of worlds, but this man was nothing like that. He fought not with hatred, but with care, protecting even a stranger left to die. As night fell again, Kalen whispered a story in her own tongue. Though Daniel could not understand, he listened. Her voice painted sorrow in the air, her eyes wet with memories of her people leaving her behind. Daniel did not need the words to feel the pain. He reached out slowly, placing his hand over hers. She tensed for a moment, then relaxed. For the first time, she realized she was not alone. The bond grew stronger in silence. She learned his eyes softened when she was in pain. He learned her lips curved faintly when she gathered courage. Two souls from different worlds, carrying scars of war, now sharing the same fragile hope. But beyond the cracked walls of the comm station, the war did not rest. Engines roared faintly in the distance. Shadows moved across the horizon. Their time was limited. Daniel knew the enemy would soon sweep this area again. They could not hide forever. That night, as Kalen drifted into uneasy sleep, Daniel whispered to himself, I will get you out of this. The words were quiet, almost a promise to no one but the stars above. Yet Kalen's eyes opened just enough to catch the tone. She did not understand the sentence, but she felt the meaning. For the first time since her abandonment, she let herself believe that tomorrow could hold more than fear. And tomorrow, their journey together would truly begin. The ruins of the comm station could not hold safety for long. Daniel knew this truth as he tightened the straps of his gear and listened to the silence outside. The quiet was not peace, it was warning. Kaylin sat near the broken wall, her eyes heavy but stronger than before. She watched him move with steady hands, preparing for a journey she did not yet understand. When Daniel gestured that they must leave, Kaylin's heart trembled. Her body still weak, yet she nodded, forcing herself to stand. He offered his arm, steady as stone, and she leaned against him. Together, they stepped into the pale light of the alien dawn. The air outside carried the scent of smoke and ash. Wind rushed over the broken hills, carrying the low hum of distant engines. Daniel's eyes narrowed, scanning the horizon. The enemy was near, too near. Every instinct told him their time was running out. They moved carefully across the wasteland. Kaylin tried to walk, but her steps faltered, forcing Daniel to slow. Still, he did not let frustration show. Instead, he whispered small words, his tone calm, though she could not understand. But Kaylin felt the meaning. It was comfort, it was strength. Then the sound came, sharp and rising. The roar of machines cutting through the wind. Daniel's head snapped up, his pulse quickening. Across the ridge, enemy patrols appeared. 3 drones gliding low, their red eyes glowing. Kaylin gasped, clutching his arm. Her people had abandoned her to such hunters before, and now they had found her again. "Run," Daniel whispered, pulling her forward. They dashed across the rocky ground, dust rising with every step. The drones spotted movement, their sensors flashing, and the chase began. Red beams sliced across the rocks, searing holes where they landed. The air burned with energy fire, the world alive with danger. Daniel dragged Kaylin into a narrow ravine, the walls high and jagged. The path twisted like a snake, offering cover but also trapping them. Behind them, the drones screamed closer, their engines echoing through the stone. Daniel's breath came hard but steady, his eyes sharp. He pushed Kaylin ahead, urging her to keep moving. Her legs shook, but she forced herself onward, the fire of survival driving her steps. One drone swooped low, its weapon charging. Daniel spun, lifting his rifle, a burst of light tearing into the machine. It exploded in a flash, crashing into the rocks. But the blast shook the ravine, stones falling in a deadly rain. Daniel shielded Kaylin, his body taking the impact as they pressed against the wall. 2 drones remained, angrier, faster. They circled above, hunting, their shadows passing over the narrow ground. Daniel gritted his teeth, pulling Kaylin deeper into the canyon. Every corner was another trap, every breath another countdown. At last they stumbled into a wider clearing. But there was no exit, only stone walls rising high. A dead end. Kaylin's eyes widened in terror, her hand clutching Daniel's sleeve. She spoke quickly in her tongue, fear dripping from every word. Daniel understood without translation. If they stayed here, they would die. The drones descended, weapons glowing red. Daniel raised his rifle, but he knew the truth. 2 machines against 1 man was a losing battle. Yet surrender was never in his blood. He planted his feet, steady as the earth, his weapon ready. Kaylin watched him, her chest heavy with guilt, with despair. She had been left to die once before, and now this human risked everything for her. As the first drone swooped, Daniel fired, the shot tearing through its armor. It spiraled down, crashing in a storm of sparks. But the second fired back, a beam of red energy slicing across the ground. The blast knocked Daniel to his knees, his rifle skidding across the stone. Kaylin screamed, her voice echoing against the walls. Her legs moved before her mind could think, carrying her toward the weapon. She grabbed it with trembling hands, the weight heavy, the shape foreign. Her kind did not use human tools, but desperation gave her strength. Daniel looked up, shocked, as Kaylin aimed at the drone. Her hand shook, but she pulled the trigger. The weapon roared, light exploding from its barrel. The drone jerked, its engine sputtering. Then it crashed into the rocks with a burning scream. Silence followed, broken only by the echo of fire and Kalen's heavy breaths. She dropped the weapon, her body trembling, her knees buckling. Daniel caught her before she fell, his eyes wide with both surprise and pride. For the first time, she had fought back, not as a burden, but as a survivor. He held her close, whispering softly, though the words were lost to her. "You're stronger than you know." Kalen did not understand the sentence, but she understood the look in his eyes. For the first time since her people left her, she felt more than fear. She felt worth, she felt power, and together they had survived the chase. But the world was still watching, and more enemies would come. Their journey was far from over. The bond between them had grown in fire and danger, and the war had only just begun. The smoke of the broken drones still hung in the air when silence returned to the canyon. Daniel leaned against the stone wall, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Kalen sat beside him, her hands still trembling from the weapon she had fired. For the first time, she had taken life to save life, and the weight of it pressed hard on her heart. Daniel turned his head toward her, his eyes sharp but calm. He did not speak many words, but his hand on her shoulder was enough. It told her she was no longer helpless, no longer abandoned. She had fought, and she had chosen to live. They rested until the light of the alien sun began to fade again. But as shadows grew longer, Kalen's mind grew heavier. She looked at Daniel, then at the ground, her lips pressing tight as if she held back something too dangerous to say. Her people had left her behind, but not only because of her wounds. There was another reason, one deeper than he could guess. That night, as the stars burned above, Kalen whispered her truth. Her language flowed like soft music, foreign to Daniel's ears. Yet her eyes carried the meaning. She pointed to herself, then to her chest. Slowly she drew a glowing symbol on the dirt with her finger, a spiral crossed with 3 lines. The mark shimmered faintly, as if alive. Daniel frowned, recognizing the pattern from military briefings. It was the crest of an alien command center, a sign of high security. Why would she carry such a symbol? Kalen lowered her head, her voice filled with shame. She spoke of betrayal, of her people abandoning her not because she was weak, but because she carried a secret they feared. Through gestures, drawings, and broken words, Daniel pieced together her meaning. Kalen had knowledge of a weapon hidden deep within her people's archives, a code locked in her memory, one she had never asked for. It was not only power, it was a key that could shift the war forever. Her leaders saw her as a threat, a danger if captured, so they left her to die, hoping the secret would die with her. Daniel's breath grew heavy as the truth settled in. He had not just saved a girl. He had saved the one being who carried the power to change the war. If Command discovered this, they would use her as a tool, not as a person. If the enemy found her, they would tear her apart for what she knew. Kalen's eyes glistened as she looked at him. Her lips formed broken words in his language, strained but clear. "Danger, she whispered. Daniel studied her for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then he shook his head firmly, his voice low but steady. "Not danger, hope." She blinked at the word, tilting her head, repeating softly, "Hope," as if testing its weight. Daniel's gaze softened, though the fire in his eyes remained. He knew what he carried now, and he knew the path ahead would only grow darker. But turning back was not an option. As dawn rose again, Daniel guided Kalen out of the canyon. They moved carefully, every step heavy with the knowledge of what she carried inside her. The landscape stretched wide before them, fields of jagged stone and broken towers that once belonged to her people. Now there were nothing but shadows of a lost empire. Kalen paused at the ruins, her hand brushing against the cracked surface of a fallen wall. Memories flickered in her eyes, memories of home, of betrayal, of fear. Daniel stood behind her, silent, but his presence was steady. For the first time, she did not feel alone in her burden. As they pressed forward, the sound of engines once again drifted through the air, The enemy would not stop hunting. Not now, not ever. But something inside Kaylin had shifted. She was no longer only a girl abandoned to die. She was a bearer of truth, and beside her walked the one human who refused to see her as a weapon. He saw her as life, as worth, as hope. And together, they stepped deeper into the unknown, carrying a secret that could ignite the end or the beginning of everything. The desert night stretched wide and cold as Daniel and Kaylin moved through the shattered land. The stars above glowed like silent watchers, but the ground shook with the sound of approaching engines. The enemy had not given up the hunt, and now they were closing in, faster and stronger than before. Daniel stopped at the crest of a broken ridge, scanning the horizon. Lights flickered in the distance, dozens of them, moving in formation. Not just drones this time, but soldiers, armored and armed. They were coming for the secret Kaylin carried, and nothing would stop them. Kaylin felt the fear press against her chest, her breath shallow. She clutched the fabric of Daniel's sleeve, her eyes searching his face. "Run. We must run," she whispered in her broken voice. But Daniel shook his head slowly, his jaw set like stone. "There is no running," he muttered, though she could not fully understand. His tone told her enough. This was where they would stand. They descended into the ruins of an old fortress, its walls cracked and half buried in dust. Inside, Daniel found cover among the broken towers, setting down his rifle and checking his ammunition. It was not enough, not against so many, but his hands did not shake, his eyes did not waver. Kaylin watched him, her heart torn between terror and awe. He was one man, yet he prepared as if he could hold back an army. The engines grew louder, the lights brighter. Shadows moved across the walls as the enemy surrounded the ruins. The ground trembled as armored boots struck the earth. Daniel crouched low, pulling Kaylin close. "Stay behind me," he said firmly, pointing at the ground. She understood, though every part of her wanted to protest. She had been a burden for too long, and now her secret had brought this storm. But Daniel's steady eyes silenced her words. The first wave of soldiers stormed the ruins, weapons flashing red. Daniel fired, each shot sharp and precise. The stone walls shook with explosions, fire lighting the night. Kaylin covered her ears, the noise deafening, yet her eyes never left Daniel. He moved like a shadow, swift and unyielding, his body refusing to fall. Still, there were too many. For every soldier he struck down, more poured into the ruins. The fortress filled with smoke and fire, the air thick with the taste of ash. Daniel fought harder, his voice breaking into a shout as he pushed back wave after wave. But even he could not stand forever. A blast struck near, throwing him across the stone. His weapon slid from his grip, his armor cracked, blood seeping through. Kaylin screamed, rushing to his side. Her hands shook as she tried to lift him, her tears burning against her skin. "No, no, leave me," he rasped, his voice broken. But Kaylin shook her head fiercely, clutching him with all her strength. Her people had abandoned her once, but she would not abandon him. Not now, not ever. The soldiers closed in, their weapons raised, their shadows stretching tall. Kaylin rose, placing herself between Daniel and the advancing enemy, her small frame shaking, yet her eyes fierce. She spread her arms wide, shouting words in her own tongue, a cry of defiance. The soldiers hesitated, confused, their leader raising a hand to halt. They wanted her alive, but she would not go quietly. Daniel struggled to rise, his hand gripping her wrist weakly. "Kaylin, no," he whispered, but his voice faded under the roar of engines. Kaylin turned her head, meeting his gaze, her lips trembling but firm. "Together," she said in broken human word, the one she had learned. "Hope." Her voice cut through the smoke like a blade. Daniel's strength surged again, his body refusing to give in. With one last effort, he pulled his weapon back in his hands. Kaylin knelt beside him, pressing her palms against the broken ground. The symbol she had drawn before glowed faintly in the dust, reacting to her touch. The secret inside her was awakening. The ruins shook as light burst from the ground. Soldiers stumbled back, their weapons faltering. A pulse of energy spread through the fortress, bending the air. Daniel shielded Kalen as the wave passed, but his eyes widened in shock. She had not only carried knowledge, she carried power. The enemy screamed orders, rushing forward again. Daniel rose to his knees, firing into the chaos. Kalen stood with him, the glow of the symbol burning brighter under her skin. For the first time, she was not only protected, she was fighting. Together, they faced the storm side by side. And as the night raged around them, the last stand had begun. The ruins glowed with fire as night turned toward dawn. Smoke curled through the broken walls, carrying the cries of retreating soldiers. The enemy had been pushed back for now, their machines scattered across the battlefield like broken toys. Daniel stood wounded, his armor cracked and his body shaking, yet his eyes still sharp. Beside him, Kalen glowed faintly with the strange light of her secret, her breath heavy but her spirit unbroken. The last stand had not ended in death, but in survival. And survival was its own victory. Daniel leaned against the shattered stone, his rifle hanging at his side. Every muscle in his body screamed with pain, but he stayed upright. He looked at Kalen, at the way her small frame seemed to carry a weight far greater than her years. She met his gaze, her lips trembling as she whispered the word she had learned. Hope. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the wind moving through the ruins. Daniel nodded once, his voice low but steady. Yes, hope. Kalen lowered herself beside him, pressing her hand over his wounded shoulder. Her touch was weak, but her eyes carried determination. She had been abandoned by her people, left to die as a secret too dangerous to live. Yet here she was alive because one human refused to let go. The bond between them was no longer just survival. It was trust. It was choice. As the first light of dawn broke across the alien sky, Daniel and Kalen moved slowly out of the fortress. Every step was heavy, but every step was forward. The land stretched wide and empty, painted gold by the rising sun. For the first time since the war began, Kalen felt the warmth of light, not as fire, but as promise. Daniel stopped at the ridge, scanning the horizon. More enemies would come, of that he was certain, but he also knew something had changed. The secret Kalen carried was no longer only a burden. It was a weapon, yes, but it was also a chance to end the war. Not through destruction, but through truth. Kalen touched his arm, drawing his attention. Her voice was soft, broken by her accent, yet clear. Together, she said, repeating the words she had once spoken in the ruins. Daniel studied her for a moment, then gave a small, tired smile. Together, he agreed. The journey ahead was uncertain, filled with danger, betrayal, and battles yet to come. But as they stood side by side, the broken soldier and the abandoned alien girl, the weight of the future did not seem impossible. Because in the ashes of war, they had found something no weapon could destroy. Faith. Faith in survival. Faith in each other. Faith in the small spark that could grow into a new dawn. The sun rose higher, bathing the ruins in light. Behind them lay fire and smoke. Ahead of them lay shadows and trials. But between them stretched a bond forged in pain, in courage, in sacrifice. Daniel adjusted his rifle. Kalen steadied her breath. And together they stepped forward, carrying not only a secret that could end the war, but a hope that could change two worlds forever. The dawn did not belong to the victors, nor to the defeated. It belonged to those who chose to fight for more than survival. It belonged to those who chose to protect, to believe, to hope. And on that distant world, under the rising light, one human and one alien walked into a future unknown. Not enemies, not tools, but allies. Not abandoned, not alone, but together. The war was not over, but the new dawn had begun.